Alright, this is my video 1 for the game engine final sprint. For this video we'll be looking at the main engine features as well as the asset managers and the time managers, or just time manager, there's only one. But starting off looking at the Atlas header file here at the top, we can see all these public access functions that the user can use for setting the window name, the height, and width, as well as the clear color, and then functions to access the width and height. You can see this is a singleton, and down here at the bottom we have the main functions that are the game loop that will be called through the run function, which we have this Atlas run here, which is just calling run on the game engine, which, looking inside the main, is all that we see is running is the Atlas run. If we look at the actual CPP file, we'll see here the Atlas initialize just calls the initialize function of the Atlas engine, which is down here in the resources. And inside here is just where the user can set window name and the width and height and the background color of the window. And then after that we have the load content, which will just load the start level, which is defined by the user inside of load all resources. Then we'll come in and we will load all our models, then load our default models that we're assuming will be loaded, load all shaders, load the default shaders, load textures, and then load all user defined images that we should create, and then we'll initialize the current scene that was set by the user. And then down here we have our update of the engine, and at the top of every frame we're processing time inside of the time manager attorney using the get time and seconds from this engine that we're passing through, and then we'll update everything in the scene through the scene manager. In the draw at the top of the frame we have the visualizer visualizing all, which will be all our B-spheres for collision that are registering for show B-sphere. And then we call draw inside everything in the scene using the scene manager. And then upon closing the window we have our unload content, which will just call the static delete on all these managers to clean up all of the resources that we've created inside of them. If we look down here in the, start with this, the image manager, we have two create functions inside the image manager. They both take keys and a texture key, which will be, this key is the name of what is being stored, and then you give the name of the texture you want that will be fetched from the texture manager. And then you can define the rect, which is where in the texture you want to create that image, and then you can also define it without that, which if we look in the image manager, this up here is if you define the rect, then we will create the image passing in the texture that we get from the texture manager with that key, and then we'll give it the rect. And then otherwise, if you don't define the rect, then we will define a new rect that is just the entirety of that texture. So not defining the rect, we'll just default to the entire texture, and then we'll create the image based on that. And then we just have the get function to retrieve, and then the delete will delete everything on the list and clear it out. If we're looking into something like the model manager, it would be essentially the same thing. So we're looking at load functions with keys, and then we have a function if you're looking to load a pre-made model type, or if you're just looking to load one from the file, which is given that path. So then if we look in here, we have these load functions taking in the resource map, which is our collection of models, and then the string in the path, and then we'll load it in and create a new model, which we store inside the resource map, which can be fetched from our get function that uses the key that is stored in the map. And then the delete is essentially the same thing, just calling delete on everything, all the models that we created, and then we'll clear it out. And then inside all these managers, the model, shader, and texture, at the top we have a resource path, which is defined for the models, it's models, and then textures and shaders and so forth. And if we're looking inside of the actual layout for the Atlas engine, we have the assets folder, which then contains a models, shaders, and textures folder. So then all our textures would be placed inside textures, and the shaders are inside shaders. And so using this resource path, we can go into the right folder and grab the correct assets. Shader Manager is just going to be another essentially repeat of the Model Manager, except we do not have any load pre-made, so we just have a single load function and then the same default functions. But looking at this, I didn't go over it in Model Manager, but we have the load default shaders, where shaders that we're assuming will be loaded without requiring the user to do it will be loaded at the start of the game. So here we're loading shaders that are used for the sprite render and the sprite line render. And in the Model Manager, we're loading the unit square XY, which is used for the sprites, so the user doesn't have to load that themselves. And then Texture Manager will be the same thing with the get and load with no default textures to load, so we just have another load all. But looking down in the load all resources .cpp, we can see we have a load all models where we can define the model key, and then we define the name of the model within the file, so they're all .azules. Our load textures with the keys and file names. Same structure for the shaders. And then in the load all images, since all of these images are the entire textures, I don't need to define the rect. So instead I can just give it a name and then the name of whatever texture I'm looking for. So in this case, you're looking for Stitch, and we'll place that in here. And down here we can set the start scene inside the scene manager to the splash screen, which is then initialized inside the or the end of the loading process. Then we can look down here at the time manager, which has the process time, where it takes in the system time from the game engine at the top of the update frame. And then it also has get time and get frame time functions if the user needs to get any time values. But looking in the actual time manager, upon being created, we set the current time and the frame time to 0, as well as the previous time, and then we create a new freeze time, which is used for the freeze frame function. And you can see in our private process time, we're just storing the previous time and then doing the math to get the frame time, and then we use get time in seconds through freeze time in case the user wants to freeze the update loop of the game, which is not much to see in this. This is just code that was given on the Perforce, which just uses the freeze keys of F10 and F9. But if we go in here and we run this, the splash screen will pop up and everything loads properly. We'll just demo this real quick. You can see pressing press F10 and freeze the frame, and then F9 will inch us forward. You can see that in the output window. Let that run. Then if we take a look at the output, drag this over, you see at the top all of our models being loaded, as well as the shaders, textures, and then we create images down here. This is the changing scene from coming out of the splash screen. And you see the cleanup on the scene that was inside, but then when we call game exit, we'll see the cleanup on all the model or all the different managers, and then we'll see the actual scene cleanup, and we'll see all the bullets being deleted, as well as the enemies. But that is video number 1, and video number 2 I'll detail the actual scene management as well as the update and draw and any other various game object functions.